Hey everyone, welcome back to the Family Docs Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rob Assibey, Associate Program Director at San Ysidro General Hospital Family Medicine Residency Program and our new District 8 Director. I'm so thrilled to be joined today by two of my esteemed colleagues, Drs. Shannon Connolly and Melissa Campos, whom I serve with on CAFP's newest committee, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, also known as JEDI. Listen in to learn all about how and why this committee was started and the work we're doing, why JEDI is important, and how you can learn more and get involved. Let's get into it with some introductions. Shannon, do you want to start?
Sure. My name's Shannon Connolly, and my pronouns are she, her. And I currently work as the Associate Medical Director for Planned Parenthood of Orange and San Bernardino counties. And I'm the chair of our JEDI committee and a past president of the CAFP. And I also do some work in diversity, equity, and inclusion with the American Academy of Family Physicians.
Quite a little resume you have there. Let's go to Melissa next.
All right. Hi. So I'm Melissa Campos. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the APD for the Scripps Chula Vista Family Medicine Residency and also a physician for family medicine physician for San Ysidro Health. I am the vice chair of the JEDI Committee. This is my first time being involved with CAFP. I'm a past president of the San Diego Academy of Family Physicians, and I love full spectrum family medicine and get to deliver babies and do medicine with our family medicine residents, including all the clinic stuff and the nursing homes. So I just did everything that I did as a resident. I've continued to do so far. So really excited to be joining this conversation.
Thank you guys for both being here. I guess that's the point of being a family medicine doc, right? You can continue to do it all, whether you're a resident or you're a practicing physician. Our goal and our purpose sometimes is to continue practicing full spectrum. Before we get into our conversation, I want to do a little disclaimer so that Lucasfilm doesn't come after us. I know we're using JEDI. For the point of the conversation, we don't want to keep using justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, but this is our form of JEDI, not to be confused with Star Wars. Do either one of you guys want to kind of start off of why we even started talking about JEDI, or why does CAFP value this so much that we even created a committee?
So I think it goes back to it was around 2019, 2020 when we were emerging from the pandemic, the first wave of the pandemic. And it was a really critical time in the history of our country because we were really going through a time of national reckoning about racism and health equity. There were a lot of things happening on the national stage. George Floyd had just been murdered. There were all kinds of inequities that had really been uncovered and highlighted by the COVID pandemic. And there was a lot happening at the border with immigration. This was a time of family separation, and we were hearing stories of children being separated from their families. And there was just so much happening. And it happened to be a year of strategic planning for the CAFP. And so our board of directors got together and we had this strategic planning retreat where we talked about what did we want our organization to do and focus on over the next few years. And out of that came a very strong desire to center health equity work and anti-racism work in what we were doing as an organization. And so that was kind of the beginning of it, where the board wrote into the strategic plan that justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion work was going to be part of our directive as an organization. And then it just kind of took off from there. And I'll let Melissa kind of take us from there with what happened.
Yeah. So we formed a task force from that, and I was able to be a part of that task force with Shannon. And we had a series of meetings, and we talked about definitions, and then also talked about kind of looking at the strategic plan and thinking of strategies and what to prioritize. And so we had a really fun meeting with our task force. But really, the most important recommendation of that task force was that we needed an enduring committee, and so the JEDI committee that came out of that, and so that was a really exciting part. So we got to reapply to be part of that committee, and I'm happy to continue on with the work with CAFP through this committee now.
Yeah, I think the interesting part about that is reminiscing about it now. Was it November 2021? We were in San Diego for that board meeting. It was Paradise Resort or something.
Paradise
Of that
Point in San
There
Diego.
it is, Paradise Point, San Diego. And we were starting to talk about these conversations and what would be important for our not only our board to focus on, but what would our members want to focus on and what is happening nationally. And I remember when we put together JEDI as part of the one of the topics, I really didn't imagine it to be where we are today. And I think it's interesting how far we've grown and how much we've done, to the point where I know in my own practice, like we have been doing, we haven't called anything JEDI, but we had a similar committee where we're trying to restructure what we do within our residency program. And I know that similar stuff that the JEDI committee is also trying to do within the organization, if I'm not correct.
Yeah, I think it just makes perfect sense that family doctors would take on this work because we really know what injustice looks like, right? Because our work revolves around the health effects of it. And family doctors have always historically uplifted the voices of those who have been overlooked or disenfranchised. And so it makes perfect sense that we would say this is our opportunity here to make a difference and to move our collective societal narrative forward. I also think that there was a piece of our organization in particular that's very aspirational and wanting to lead this change. And we talked about how we could be a national thought leader, and we could
Hmm.
influence other medical societies. We could influence our national academy. And I was really excited by that. I thought, yeah, we really can do this. We have a lot of will and a lot of desire to move the needle on health equity work. And so it was a really exciting time.
Yeah, it's still an exciting time, I would say. I think the people that are involved in the committee were from diverse backgrounds and have diverse experience, but have a similar passion. And it's really great to see how we can all come together from different parts of California and think about how can we help family physicians be more diverse and more inclusive? How can we work with the pipeline of people coming into medicine, particularly family medicine, since we do a lot of primary care? And we know that evidence out there shows that having a physician who looks like you, who understands your language and your culture, you're going to have better health outcomes. You're going to be more satisfied and more likely to continue with the plan that's devised with your doctor. And so I think I totally agree, Shen. I think we are, family medicine can be a leader in this work amongst all the specialties just because of the nature of what we do and who we are, and then that we are embedded into the communities and can inspire others to, join our field.
I agree. I think one of the cool things too is when we were talking about the task force and trying to make it into a committee. I know CAFP Board was talking about the resources and all those things that go into it, but part of our push was this is very, very important. I think our members would appreciate it. And once we did that call to action for the hey, this committee is starting, applications are opening up this time, we had a lot of applications. I remember talking to Morgan about it, and she was like, "This is a significant amount of applications." And the cool thing was, these are people who had never been involved in CAP
Hmm.
before, are now coming in to join or apply for this committee. And with all of that, we had a very, very strong and diverse group of people who now serve on that committee. Which I think was a pretty powerful thing and kind of shows the board that, hey, this was something that we needed to do and kind of continue on as a committee, because like nationally this is what's being talked about and we don't have to be behind. We can kind of be in the front, like we keep talking about, right, leading the charge, which is amazing. I mean, California is a big enough state. I think we have enough cool things going on here that we can continue to move and push the needle forward in this country.
Absolutely. And California is also an incredibly diverse state relative to a lot of the rest of the country. And so not only do we owe it to the communities that we serve in California, but I think we can be a model for how to promote diversity and inclusiveness amongst physicians.
Agreed. Melissa, do you want to touch base on a little bit of the work that the committee has done?
Yeah, so we wanted to collect some data to see where we were at, right? Because we felt like CFP, leadership's diverse. We are, we're doing well, but are we really? Let's take a look. Let's get some data. So we did submit a survey to the leadership of CAFP. So this was the board, committee members. Shannon, let me know if there was I think there was basically
Chapter leaders.
chapter leaders.
Yeah.
They're involved. And, some of the data that we got was not surprising. We kind of knew. And some of it was surprising. They were like, oh, I didn't realize that, this group of people, um, you know, is this percentage of the leadership. And so we looked at race, ethnicity, we looked at languages, we looked at gender identity, religion, and a kind of a host of demographic factors just to get a sense of where we were at, since that information wasn't available through other means about our leadership in CFP.
And it really was exciting to actually have the data. It was the first time we had that data. And one of the things that the commission or the committee and also the task force felt very strongly about was that we measure and set benchmarks and be as transparent about that information as possible. So we had to start out by saying, well, who are we? We haven't collected that information yet. And from there, we could then start to analyze that information and look at, are there gaps in our leadership? Are there opportunities to be more representative of the California population? And so gathering that first survey was a really key point in time for the CAFP because it gave us a baseline data.
Right. And I think to Melissa's earlier point, when we're talking about representation and our patients having better health outcomes when they know that their physician looks like them, talks like them. Similarly, within our organization, how many of our membership or how many of our patients that we're seeing are represented by our leadership? And I think that was also part of the point of doing this survey. And drum roll, what was our results specifically, Shannon or Melissa, that I think we want to highlight or kind of focus on, right? I think our listeners are also interested now that we brought it up to kind of see like where we're going with this data. What are we going to do with it and how do we see the future going?
Yeah, I will say, as self-identified Latina, Mexican American, one thing that we found was that our Latino, Latina, Latinx, Latine, I know there's a lot of kind of terms out there to be inclusive of this large community, is that it was about, I believe, 13% of the CAFP leadership, which is less than the population of California, especially I think most people work where there are a lot of Spanish speaking or bilingual Latinos around there. So that was, I think, surprising to see the discrepancy in that particular group of people. And personally, as someone who identifies with that group, I will say that I have seen that in my moments of looking at leadership within San Diego and CAFP and AAFP. It's just don't always see people who look like me all the time. And I know that's not unique to my situation, but to actually see the data, I think it was stark. And everyone on the committee who saw the data acknowledged it as well, is that this is an area where we lack representation in our leadership.
And Melissa, you kind of touched on the different words that we're using to describe groups, but can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of terms thrown out there to try to be more inclusive of people who are non-binary and different identities. And so, there's been terms of like Hispanic and Latino or Latina, and so Latinx came out with an X to try to be more gender neutral. But I think that for certain groups of people, that just seemed very Americanized, and X is not a common letter. Or it just didn't sound like Spanish, like you would say in Spanish. It was very awkward to say, and so people had issue with that term. So Latina with an E at the end, which is I think more typical in Spanish language, was a way to have it seem more natural and more inclusive. And so I'm by means no expert in language and identities, but just reading about it as we were preparing for this podcast, it was interesting to see kind of the different terms, and even among friends of mine who are who identify with this group, I think there's some, there's certain terms that they prefer than others, but I think it's very interesting. And I think at the end of the day, we're just trying to do what's going to be best for people and their identities. And we acknowledge that that term may not always represent everyone, and it is a large group of people, the same as Asian American may. We're trying to encompass a lot of different cultures and languages into one group of people. So I think as we were going through this process, I can reflect personally that sometimes the terms that we use may not be the terms that people use, but we'll try our best to get better and to educate ourselves to make sure that we use the correct term so that we do try to use the labels that people want.
I know when we were having a lot of these conversations in the task force, I was learning a lot, listening to my colleagues speak from their experiences and what they've heard from their patients and their communities. And it really struck me that language, much like family medicine, is continually evolving and changing. And what might be right to do at one point in time might be different at another point in time. And it just really drove home for me that there's a continual lifelong learning that needs to occur around issues of identity, and it was kind of a perfect example of this when we were having that conversation about what word are we going to use to describe this group of people in our survey.
Yeah.
And Melissa, I know you say that you're no expert, but you're far more of an expert than I am in this topic of language. And I found this whole process and all these conversations very interesting because, you come to a situation where you're like, oh, Latinx, you just kind of accept it because it had been said so much. I had really accepted it. I had never questioned it. I had never thought about other people who might not identify as that, or even like you said, in the in the culture, you can't even pronounce that X. Like it just doesn't even flow appropriately. That literally never even crossed my mind until right now. I'm like, you're right. How would you say that? And when you say like Latin and how it's just easier and it could be more all inclusive, I think we can all constantly and continually keep learning from each other. And I appreciate the conversation that you're bringing around this. And even Shannon, right now, when you're just talking about the task force, I actually remember, I think it was the beginning of our task force meeting when you're talking about safe spaces, because that thing has stuck with me for actually a very long time. For those of you that don't know what she said, I think somebody had said, we're in a safe space, we can all talk. And Shannon made very profound statement about how we can't necessarily say it's a safe space. No one except the person who's experiencing can actually consider a space safe. And it struck me, like I was like, oh my goodness, have I been saying that there's safe spaces everywhere and there's not actually safe spaces? But it was more of like, now I can start having these thoughts and start trying to be more inclusive of what's going on with other people, and not just it being about me, but it being about other people. And a lot of times you can think or believe that you're doing a lot of work within the DEI or JEDI space, but there's still a lot of growth that you can do in yourself. So like, I remember just talking about this right now made me think about that, because those things are also changing, and there's a lot that's changing and a lot that we're trying to improve ourselves. So at the end of the day, we're all learners. I think when we went into medicine, we told ourselves we're lifelong learners, and that's for sure very true.
Agree 100%, Rob, with that. Those statements that, you know, medicine changes. There's new treatments for diabetes, and then these conversations about diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice. Like the same thing. Like the terms are changing. The way we should have conversations. We're learning all from each other, and so I think it's so important to be humble, to be open-minded, and be okay to admit that you made a mistake. I think we a lot of people are learning this in medical schools with like gender affirming care. That's something that, like, when I was in med school, it was not a thing, and that we were taught. Obviously, it's very important. It helps us care for our patients, and now medical students are learning this and coming up. And so we, as attendings who are older in our careers, we can learn from the younger generations, and that's okay, and to not feel threatened by that. And so the same thing with different types of terms and languages around these conversations in these spaces. It's really important to be able to grow, to change, and to learn from each other.
And I think
By the
sometimes
way,
the
we're still
evolution.
young
Oh, go ahead.
attendings. We're not old. I'm just
Speak
gonna
for
point of
yourself, Rob.
contention before Shannon continues. I'm like, Melissa, we're all still young attending.
We're on the cusp. We're on the cusp there, I think.
Well, we like to think of ourselves as young anyway.
Exactly. Sorry, Shannon. Didn't mean to cut you off.
No worries. I was just going to say that sometimes I feel that the evolution of language drives our social narrative as well. And I, can think of a variety of different topics where the way we speak and the words that we use to describe those things have changed over time. Melissa brought up gender affirming care. That's absolutely one of them. I think even in the past decade, as in family medicine, we've been thinking a lot about trauma informed care, and how just an awareness of people's life experiences and trauma requires of us that we treat our patients in different ways and in more mindful ways. And so that's another area that has given me a lot of pause to think about. But even in terms of, how we use person first language, or how we address conditions that are historically very stigmatized in medicine, such as obesity or substance use disorders, or certain conditions, like we've really we're starting to make some change. And as family doctors, I think we're just, being curious and taking the time to ask people, like, oh, I see you used a different word than, I've heard before. Like, tell me more about that. Like, why did you use that word, and what can I learn from your usage of that word? I really have enjoyed engaging in those conversations with my colleagues and my patients, and really trying to understand. We learn so much from each other. And I have to give a shout out to one of my colleagues, because I learned about safe spaces from one of my family physician colleagues. And much like you, it was like this aha moment where I was like, oh my gosh, that's so true. I need to think about it that way.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, Shannon. I think it's super important to kind of constantly be in that space where we're always learning and always growing, and especially like you said, gender affirming care with what Melissa was saying earlier. When I went to medical school, nothing about it. And I started residency, and if it wasn't for my residency program having a clinic specifically for that, I probably still wouldn't know. And even going through those clinics today, we're still constantly learning. So I think our listeners are also wondering, with this new JEDI committee and having these recommendations, where does the academy see themselves going forward, or how do we use the JEDI committee to change the academy in the aspect of maybe conferences, lectures, and stuff like that?
Well, I think one of the things that has been really clear as a member of this committee is that our goal is to not have an intervention that happens once in time and then is forgotten about later. We really wanted to make sure that we were baking enduring things into the workflows, the operations, the decision making of our organization, so that we could continue to build on this work in perpetuity. And so we talked a lot about things like, do we need to have a tool that we give to all of our lecturers to ensure that they are addressing issues of health equity in the CME that we are sponsoring? Are we doing a sufficient job of creating SMART goals, right? Like things that are measurable? Are we benchmarking? Are we really holding ourselves to the goals that we determine or develop, and are we ensuring that our success is measured by our achievement of those goals? We wanted really to be very clear that, it's not just that equity is a good idea and we all support it and that's wonderful. We wanted to have really concrete change that we could look at and we could over time measure and say, okay, well, in 2024, this is where we were with our representation of Latina leaders in our organization, and in 2030, here's where we are. So we really wanted to make sure that we were developing measurable goals for ourselves, and then just trying to bake it into all of our practices, whether it's education or leadership or recruitment. Just making sure that we're always looking through that JEDI lens, and ensuring that it always remains centered in our conversations, and really is woven through all of the work that we do.
Speaking of benchmarking, I know our Latin aid representation. I will give a shout out to my colleague who's going to be the alternate District 8 director. So that's one more representation that we have. But I think weaving everything into the culture of what we do in CAFP is very important. And I think we also have a toolkit for resolutions, or we're considering a toolkit for resolutions as well, and that JEDI lens. Do either of you in your organizations have taken any of these JEDI principles back? Because I know, like Melissa, you're with the residency program, and Shannon, you're doing a whole lot of things, more than one. And have any of you guys used any of those things?
Yeah, I think, well, for like the CAP faculty, there's like a list of questions to look at JEDI. And so I think what we're going to do in our program is take those questions and have our residents and our faculty, and at some point, our specialists who talk to the residents, consider those questions. Who are they talking about when they're making these presentations about diabetes or high blood pressure? Sorry, that's my little one in the background going to bed. Um, so diabetes, high blood pressure, but like how are these patients being presented? How are the disparities being presented? Is it because it's just based off race? As we know, race is a social construct. So what are some of the barriers that contribute? Is it the zip code they live in? Is it because they lack access to certain medications because of policies that are in place? So those are the types of questions that we're gonna take back, and so that's something that I've taken from CAFP that they're doing. Is that something that we can do in our residency program when we're having these conversations, is starting to practice what we preach and really think about when we're having core topics and educating our future family medicine physician workforce. Let's think about it from that point on.
And I think for me, the most important thing that I've learned from this Jedi work is that we measure what we treasure, right? And if we're not measuring it, if we're not gathering data, then we don't know if we're making a difference. And so one of the things that in my organization we're doing a lot of work around is being able to stratify things like our quality metrics by race and ethnicity or other demographic, so that we can look at that and we can say, here's a disparity in this population. Now let's go do a series of PDSAs to try different interventions to try to narrow that gap. And I think it's one thing to say, okay, well, here's a person, just one individual that is missing this quality measure. Maybe it's, who knows, colorectal cancer screening. So I'm going to work with that individual to help them. But it's an entirely different thing to say, here's an entire population in our community that we are not serving well, and we need to change our practices to ensure that we are serving them better. And I think once you have data that you can slice in these different ways, you can start to really identify who is most affected, right? Because a lot of times in data sets, we have a group that's very advantaged and a group that's very disadvantaged, and they average together as just okay advantage, right? But actually, it's bimodal, and there's these two groups, and we need to separate them out and preferentially allocate resources to the group that is experiencing an inequity. And so, really, really looking at our data and looking at our ability to collect data and analyze it on a population level has been a process that we're embarking on in our organization.
Wow. I don't know about the listeners, but you are definitely goals. You guys are both doing tremendous work in your organizations. I think our residency program is a little bit farther behind, but we are trying to do some strides as well with even our lectures, and being very intentional about how we process everything and how we talk about everything, how we teach everything. About there's some slide in everybody's lectures that has to have something in regards to health equity, or any communities or populations that may be affected by this diagnosis that we may not know about. Or like you said, Shannon, if there's one specific population that's not doing this screening, how do we target that population? Is it because they don't trust us? Do we not sound like them? Is it that when we're talking to them, we're not using interpreters, or we are using interpreters and it takes too long, so we don't want to give all the information, right? So there's so many different barriers that we have to kind of address, and I think that was very, very well put about what your organization is doing in these things. And if our listeners aren't taking notes, you can kind of replay this and then listen to it and then take notes again, and then try to emulate those things. Or it could be even something simpler, where anything that you can take from any of this work. And if you want to learn more about it, there's also way more notes that we are going to provide that you can also do more work on. So, speaking on all of these wonderful things that you guys are doing, are there any additional resources we can give to our listeners or where they may be able to find more information on how to get started with something?
One of the really great resources that the American Academy of Family Physicians has published is the Everyone Project, which is a whole area of their website that's just full of resources, everything from CME to toolkits. There's something called the Neighborhood Navigator, which is a compendium of community resources by zip code that covers every zip code in the United States. So if you're looking for resources for things like housing insecurity or food insecurity, the AAFP's got your back, and that's a great place to look. Also, the CAFP is doing some amazing work in education, and I just want to highlight a few really cool things. The first is we are in the very near future going to have POP, that's our annual conference. And there's some sessions on there that go over health equity work. There's one about racial bias in medical research. There's another one about ACEs, and there's another one about improved cancer screening in LGBTQ plus communities. So each of those sessions will have a strong health equity component to it. And that'll be again at POP, which is August 23rd through 25th. And we'll put info about it in the show notes.
Additionally, there are other resources that I know you didn't mention where some of the committee people can join, and also something very, very cool, NCCL. The National Conference of Constituency Leaders was probably one of the greatest conferences I think I've ever been to. I just for the first time went a month ago now or so, and it is amazing. A whole bunch of leaders from all over different states trying to do the same thing. Everybody is there working on policies and advocating for family medicine on the national level with 5 different constituencies. I'm not going to say we had a CAP sweep because some people may get offended in other states if they listen to this, but we did fairly well in our running for co-conveners at that conference.
Awesome. I am excited about that. I have never been, Rob, but I have heard about it, and I am hoping I can go in the future as long as life and work allows. But yes, I saw some photos from there, and it was very exciting to see how well CAFP was represented in that conference.
It's a
Even
really
if
great conference. Yeah. Go ahead, Rob.
even if life and work don't allow, CAFP will allow, and that's all you need to go.
Excellent. I also say, other ways to get involved. If you're a little bit shy about getting involved with CFP on the state level, this is one way that I got involved was on the local level. So getting involved with your local chapter is a great way to kind of dip your toes in the water and start to see what's going on in your local community. And through that, there are avenues to get more involved on the state level. So, for those of you who aren't sure of who's in charge of your local chapter, I know there are resources to reach out and find out and get contact information so you can start going to those meetings and really help improve some of the diversity that we have in leadership. That is one way to start, is just to get involved at the local level and talk about issues that you think should be talked about that people may not know.
And last, I also wanted to highlight that the CAFP has this wonderful learning resource called Homeroom, which is a compendium of CME that's all recorded. And if you're a CAFP member, you have free access to it. And you will find many, many sessions in there that touch on health equity. I have to give a special shout out to the ACEs curriculum. It's truly fantastic, was very thoughtfully put together by some very diverse faculty that have spent their careers really thinking very deeply about trauma and how to approach trauma as a family physician. And so I really recommend those. And you get CME credit for completing them.
And for those of you who are interested in what the rest of the survey showed, that information will be published on our JEDI page on the CFP website at familydocs.org/JEDI.
And we'll drop links to all this stuff in the show notes.
Yes.
Yes, if there's anything that you think you missed or you want any more information, check out the show notes below. And is there anything else?
I mean, I'd love to give a shout out to both of you all for being just fantastic leaders in this space, for dedicating a lot of your time and energy outside of work to really thoughtfully advancing the dialogue around JEDI work, and for including your colleagues and calling in colleagues and recruiting new members of the CAFP and encouraging them to take on leadership positions. You both have been so incredibly instrumental in this work for our organization, and I just wanted to express my gratitude.
Oh, well, thank you. I think, Shannon, you're just such a role model. Obviously, you've done so much work with CFP already, and the fact that you've continued to take on ongoing leadership roles with CFP and help bring, others under your wings, and letting us know that it is okay to do this work. It is important to do this work, and to not have our voices to speak loudly with our voices, and make sure that we help make CFP a better place for everyone. That's a family medicine doc, and for our patients here in California and across the nation.
You guys are both amazing. I think this was a tremendous, tremendous episode. Big shout out to the both of you guys. I continuously look up to you guys, as you are the leaders of CAFP, flat out. You guys have taken on the leadership role in being the chair and co-chair of the JEDI Committee, task force first, and then committee, and have done a tremendous job. And I continuously look up to the both of you and how I can be better. And thank you for coming on, sharing your perspectives, sharing your insights, sharing your stories, and sharing your vulnerability and just being open. I think that's part of a very difficult thing that a lot of us have a hard time doing. But you both have come on here and just spoke from the heart. And I think I can speak for all our listeners that we really appreciate it. Thank you guys. Additionally, for our listeners, if there's any more information that you need, always look at our show notes. Please visit our JEDI page at familydocs.org/JEDI. So, thank you all, and until next time, this is your favorite family physician, Dr. Rob Assibey.